Cold doesn't just hurt. Past a certain point, it stops being a sensation and becomes a kind of violence. November 1950, North Korea. 30 below zero. 40 below with the wind. Cold that froze your spit before it hit the ground. Cold that turned your rifle into a useless club because the firing pin wouldn't work. Cold that killed you as surely as any Chinese bullet. And the Chinese, Jesus Christ, the Chinese. My name is Thomas Brennan. Sergeant, United States Army, 7th Infantry Division, from Chicago, where I thought I knew what cold was. Turned out I didn't know a goddamn thing about cold until Korea. I'd enlisted in 1948, peacetime Army. Figured I'd do my 3 years and get out. Then North Korea invaded the South in June 1950, and suddenly we were at war again. 5 years after we'd finished with Germany and Japan, we were fighting in Korea. Most Americans couldn't even find Korea on a map. I couldn't. Some peninsula in Asia that nobody cared about until the communists tried to take it over. They shipped us over in August. Summer in Korea was hot, humid, miserable. We pushed the North Koreans back, fought our way north toward the Chinese border. MacArthur said we'd be home by Christmas, said the war was practically over. We believed him. Why wouldn't we? We'd beaten the Germans and the Japanese. North Korea was nothing. A few more weeks and we'd wrap this up. October, we were pushing toward the Yalu River, the border with China. Intelligence kept saying the Chinese wouldn't intervene, said China was too weak, too disorganized, too busy with their own problems to get involved in Korea. Intelligence was wrong. November 1st, the Chinese hit us. Hundreds of thousands of them pouring across the Yalu. They'd been infiltrating for weeks, hiding in the mountains, waiting. We didn't know they were there until they attacked. Suddenly, we weren't fighting a defeated North Korean army. We were fighting the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and there were more of them than we could count. And then winter came. Korea in winter isn't just cold. It's a special kind of hell. Mountains, wind, temperatures that drop so low your body starts shutting down. We weren't equipped for it. Summer uniforms, thin sleeping bags, no winter gear because MacArthur said we'd be home by Christmas. The Chinese were equipped for it. They'd fought in Manchuria, in the mountains. They knew how to survive in the cold. They used it as a weapon. We didn't learn fast enough. A lot of boys died learning. The Chinese offensive started in earnest in late November. We were spread out along the Chosin Reservoir, stretched thin, overextended. The brass thought the war was over. We were just mopping up. Then on November 27th, the Chinese hit us with everything they had. 12 divisions. Over 150,000 men. All concentrated against the units around Chosin. I was with the 7th Division on the east side of the reservoir. We'd been advancing north, cocky, thinking we'd be at the Yalu in days. Instead, we were suddenly fighting for our lives against human wave attacks that came out of the darkness. The Chinese attacked at night. Always at night. They'd blow bugles and whistles, make noise to confuse us, then come in waves. You'd shoot one down and 3 more would take his place. They just kept coming. And it was cold. God, it was cold. Your rifle would freeze. The oil in the bolt would congeal and the gun would jam. We learned to piss on the bolts to thaw them. Learned that the hard way with Chinese soldiers 20 feet away and your rifle wouldn't fire. The M1 Garand worked better than most, but even that would freeze if you weren't careful. The BARS were almost useless. The machine guns would fire a few rounds and seize up. So sometimes it came down to bayonets and entrenching tools, hand-to-hand fighting in the dark at 30 below zero. Private Eddie Martinez from Texas. He froze to death in his foxhole the first night. Not shot, not wounded, just froze. We found him in the morning, covered in frost, rifle in his hands, dead. That's when we understood that the cold was as much an enemy as the Chinese. The Chinese had better winter gear than we did. Quilted uniforms, fur hats, felt boots. They knew how to move in the cold, how to survive. We were wearing field jackets and regular boots, completely inadequate. Frostbite hit the whole unit. Feet, hands, ears, nose. Your extremities would go numb, then hurt, then go numb again. That third stage was when you were losing tissue, when parts of you were dying. I lost 2 toes on my left foot. Didn't even know it until we got evacuated and a medic looked at my feet. They were black, dead tissue. He cut them off with a scalpel while I watched. Corporal Jackson from Alabama, he lost both feet. Entire feet, just gone from frostbite. He cried when they told him. Not from pain. He couldn't feel them anymore. But from knowing he'd never walk right again. We tried to retreat south. The Chinese had cut the road. We were surrounded. Chosin Reservoir. The frozen Chosin, they called it later. With American and Marine units trapped around the reservoir and the Chinese closing in. The Marines were on the west side. They got the attention, the glory, the stories. Retreat, hell, we're attacking in a different direction and all that. We were on the east side, we got slaughtered. The Chinese overran our positions on November 29th. Companies were wiped out. Battalions ceased to exist. We fell back in chaos, leaving equipment, leaving wounded, just trying to survive. I remember the night of November 30th clearly. 42 below zero. Wind cutting through everything. Chinese attacking from 3 sides. Our unit, what was left of it, was trying to move south through the mountains. Half of us didn't make it. The retreat from the east side of Chosin was organized chaos at best, complete disaster at worst. We were moving south over frozen roads, through mountain passes, with Chinese forces all around us and the temperature dropping every night. The wounded were the hardest part. We had hundreds of wounded, maybe thousands. Men with gunshot wounds, shrapnel wounds, frostbite so bad their feet and hands were rotting. We loaded them on trucks when we had trucks, put them on sleds, carried them when we had to. A lot of them died on the march. The cold killed them faster than their wounds would have. You'd check on someone at a rest stop and they'd be dead, frozen solid in the truck bed. We stopped burying people. No time, no energy. The ground was frozen too hard to dig anyway. We'd just leave them by the side of the road and keep moving. I watched Lieutenant Morrison, good officer, West Point graduate, led from the front. I watched him get hit during a Chinese attack, bullet through the stomach. We got him on a truck with the other wounded. He was conscious, talking, seemed okay considering. He was dead 2 hours later. The cold killed him faster than the bullet would have. The Chinese kept hitting us. Night attacks, ambushes during the day. They'd let us move forward, then cut the column and attack the separated sections. We'd lose trucks, lose men, consolidate and keep moving. Food was scarce. We were eating sea rations when we had them. Sometimes nothing. You burn a lot of calories staying warm in that kind of cold. We were all losing weight, getting weaker. Water was a problem. Everything was frozen. We'd melt snow, but that took time and fuel. Mostly we just ate snow. It gave you terrible stomach cramps and didn't really hydrate you, but it was all we had. Sleep was impossible. You'd stop for a few hours, try to rest. But if you fell asleep in that cold, you might not wake up. So you'd doze in shifts, someone always staying awake to make sure nobody froze to death. I saw things during that retreat that I can't explain rationally. Hallucinations from exhaustion and cold. Thought I saw my mother walking beside the column. Thought I heard music. Thought I was back in Chicago, walking down Michigan Avenue in the summer. The mind does strange things when the body is shutting down. We reached Hagaruri on December 4th. The Marines had held it, established a perimeter, even built an airstrip. They were evacuating wounded by air. The wounded who couldn't walk, couldn't fight anymore. I watched them load the planes, wounded stacked like cordwood, some of them screaming, some of them quiet, some of them already dead but being loaded anyway because who could tell in the chaos. My company, we'd started with 190 men in November. We had 40 left. Some were dead, some were wounded and evacuated. Some were just gone. lost in the retreat, maybe captured, maybe frozen to death in the mountains, maybe still out there somewhere. The Chinese hit Hagaruri every night, trying to overrun us before we could evacuate. The Marines and what was left of our division held the perimeter. Barely. I was on the line one night when a Chinese soldier got into our trench. We fought hand to hand. He had a bayonet. I had an entrenching tool. I hit him in the head until he stopped moving. His blood froze on my uniform, on my hands. I couldn't wash it off, no water. So I just walked around with frozen blood on me for 3 days. You stop being human after a while. Stop feeling. Stop thinking. Just survive. 1 minute to the next. Don't let yourself freeze. Don't let the Chinese kill you. Keep moving. That's all there was. Movement and survival. Everything else was gone. The breakout from Hagaruri started December 6th. We had to fight our way south to Kotori, then to Hungnam on the coast. 40 miles through Chinese-controlled territory in the worst cold I've ever experienced. The column was massive. Marines, Army, wounded, equipment, vehicles, all trying to move south on one narrow road through the mountains. The Chinese attacked the column constantly. They'd hit us from the ridges, ambush us at choke points, cut the road behind us. Every mile cost casualties. I stopped counting the dead. There were too many. They'd be stacked by the side of the road, frozen solid, waiting for trucks that might never come to collect them. We fought through Chinese roadblocks at Hellfire Valley, lost a lot of men there. The Chinese had machine guns on the ridges overlooking the road. We had to assault uphill in the snow while they shot down at us. Corporal Williams from Brooklyn, he'd made it through the whole retreat so far. Got hit at Hellfire Valley, bullet through the lung. We got him back to the road, but there were no medical personnel available. He drowned in his own blood while we watched, unable to help. The cold never let up. December in North Korea. Temperatures dropping to 40, 45 below zero. The wind made it worse. Wind chill that could kill exposed skin in minutes. We wrapped anything we could find around our faces. Scarves, extra socks, strips of cloth. Looked like bandits or mummies, but it kept our faces from freezing. I lost feeling in my hands by mid-December. They were swollen, discolored, completely numb. I could barely hold my rifle. Pulling the trigger was a deliberate effort because I couldn't feel if my finger was on it or not. We reached Kotori on December 7th. Another defensive perimeter. More wounded to evacuate. A brief rest before pushing on to Hungnam. The Air Force was dropping supplies by parachute. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. Some of it landed in our perimeter. Some of it landed in Chinese-controlled territory. We'd watch the Chinese run out and grab American supplies while we shot at them. The Chinese were suffering too. Their supply lines were stretched. They didn't have winter gear for all their troops. We'd find frozen Chinese soldiers dead from the cold, not from combat. But there were so many of them. For every one we killed, 2 more appeared. They fought with determination bordering on fanaticism. Human wave attacks at night, suicide charges during the day. The final push to Hungnam took 4 days. 4 days of continuous fighting and marching through the cold. We reached the coast on December 11th. The Navy was there, ships waiting to evacuate us. The sight of those ships, the promise of warmth and safety, made grown men cry. They loaded us on LSTs, packed us in tight, got us out of Korea, back to South Korea, back to some place that wasn't trying to kill us with cold and Chinese soldiers. I was one of the lucky ones. I made it out, lost some toes, had frostbite scars all over, probably had some permanent damage from the cold. But I was alive. 35% of my division didn't make it out, dead or captured. That's not a retreat, that's a disaster. They shipped us back to Japan for medical treatment and rest. Warm barracks, hot food, actual beds. Should have felt like heaven. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in Korea, back in the cold, back in the mountains with Chinese soldiers coming out of the darkness. The medical people treated my frostbite, said I'd lost 2 toes, probably have circulation problems for the rest of my life, might have nerve damage, gave me pills for the pain. The physical pain wasn't the problem. It was everything else. I'd watched my company get destroyed, watched men freeze to death, watched men die from wounds that would have been survivable if it hadn't been so cold, watched men get overrun by Chinese soldiers because their rifles wouldn't fire in the cold. And the worst part? We'd been told we'd be home by Christmas, told the war was over, told the Chinese wouldn't intervene. All lies, or mistakes, or wishful thinking. Doesn't matter which. The result was the same. Thousands of men dead or captured because MacArthur and the intelligence people were wrong. They asked for volunteers to go back. The war wasn't over. The Chinese were pushing south. Seoul fell again. The war had reversed completely. Everything we'd gained in the fall was gone. I volunteered. Don't ask me why. Maybe because that's what soldiers do. Maybe because I felt guilty about surviving when so many didn't. Maybe because I was 22 years old and didn't know what else to do. We went back to Korea in January 1951. The cold was still brutal, but we had winter gear this time. Learned from our mistakes. Proper parkas, insulated boots, cold weather equipment. Too late for the guys who'd frozen at Chosin. But at least the next group of soldiers wouldn't die from their own leadership's incompetence. The war settled into a stalemate. We'd push north, the Chinese would push south, back and forth across the same ground. More men dying for hills that had no names and no strategic value. I made it to June 1951 before I cracked. We were in a firefight, nothing special, just another skirmish. The temperature was warm, maybe 70 degrees, summer in Korea. And I started shivering. Couldn't stop. My body thought it was cold even though it was warm. Started hallucinating that I was back at Chosin. Started seeing Chinese soldiers that weren't there. The medics pulled me off the line, said it was combat fatigue, said I needed rest. They sent me back to Japan, then back to the States. Medical discharge in August 1951. Honorable service. Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. Bronze Star for something I don't remember doing. I was 23 years old. I'd been in combat for a year. I'd survived Chosin Reservoir in the first winter in Korea. But I hadn't really survived. Part of me was still there, still frozen in those mountains, still fighting Chinese soldiers in the dark, still trying to get warm. I came home to Chicago in September 1951. The Korean War was still going on, but most Americans had stopped paying attention. It wasn't World War II. It wasn't glorious or clear-cut. It was just a confusing war in a place nobody cared about. I tried to explain it to my family, tried to tell them what Chosin was like, what the cold was like, what it felt like to watch your friends freeze to death. They didn't understand. How could they? They'd never been cold like that, never experienced that level of suffering. My father, who'd been in World War II in Europe, he understood better than most. He'd seen combat, but even he didn't really get it. Korea was different, colder, more brutal in different ways. I couldn't hold a job, couldn't focus, couldn't deal with normal life. The transition from combat to civilian life was too abrupt. 1 month I was fighting Chinese soldiers in Korea. The next month I was supposed to be working in an office in Chicago. It didn't work. I'd be sitting at a desk and suddenly I'd be back in the mountains, back in the cold, back in the retreat from Chosin. The frostbite damage got worse over the years. My feet hurt constantly. Cold weather was agony. I'd wear 3 pairs of socks in the winter, and my feet would still hurt. The nightmares were worse. Every night I'd be back there, back in the cold. Sometimes I'd be retreating from Chinese forces. Sometimes I'd be finding frozen bodies by the roadside. Sometimes I'd be watching Eddie Martinez freeze to death in his foxhole. I started drinking in the mid-50s, heavily. The alcohol helped for a while, made the nightmares less vivid, made the memories less sharp, but it just delayed everything, made it worse in the long run. The VA diagnosed me with what they called combat exhaustion. Later, they'd call it PTSD. Different names for the same thing, your mind breaking under the weight of what you've experienced. I met other chosen veterans over the years. There's an organization, the Chosen Few. Veterans who survived the reservoir. We'd get together sometimes, share stories, remember the guys who didn't make it. Those meetings were the only times I felt understood. The only times I could talk about what happened without seeing confusion or pity in people's eyes. The other veterans knew. They'd been there. They'd experienced the same cold, the same fear, the same helpless watching as friends died. We'd talk about the cold, about how we've never been truly warm since Korea, about how winter in America is nothing compared to winter in North Korea, about how the cold got into our bones and never left. I've been married twice, divorced twice. Couldn't make either marriage work. The nightmares, the drinking, the emotional distance. I wasn't a good husband, wasn't a good anything. I'm 60 years old now, recording this in 1980. Chosen Reservoir was 30 years ago. I've lived longer since Korea than I'd lived before it. But I'm still there, still in those mountains, still trying to stay warm. The cold is always with me. Even now, in the summer, I can feel it. The memory of cold so intense it became physical pain. Cold that killed men as surely as bullets. Cold that got into everything. Your body, your mind, your soul. They called it the Forgotten War, Korea. The war that happened between World War II and Vietnam. The one nobody remembers or cares about. But I can't forget. None of us who were at Chosin can forget. We left too many friends in those mountains. Left pieces of ourselves, left whatever innocence or youth we might have still had after World War II had ended. MacArthur said we'd be home by Christmas. He was right in a way. Some of us made it home by Christmas, in body anyway. But parts of us are still there, still at Chosin Reservoir, still in the cold, still retreating through the mountains, still watching friends die, still fighting Chinese soldiers in the dark, still trying to get warm. I've got grandchildren now. They ask me about Korea sometimes. I tell them it was cold, that I fought in a war, that I did my duty. I don't tell them about the bodies frozen by the roadside, about Martinez freezing in his foxhole, about Morrison dying from cold as much as from his wound, about the hand-to-hand fighting, about the blood that froze on my uniform. Some things are too heavy to pass on to children. But I carry them, every day, every night, in my feet that still hurt from frostbite, in my mind that still sees the frozen mountains, in my body that still shivers even in the summer. Chosin Reservoir, the frozen Chosin, 30 years ago, and I'm still there, still cold, still fighting, still trying to survive one more day in the mountains. The war might be forgotten by everyone else, but we remember. God help us, we remember everything.